May the words of my mouth and the meditations on all of our hearts always be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. In the passage of the Gospel of Mark that we just heard, Jesus and his 4 disciples, Simon, Andrew, James, and John, have left the synagogue where Jesus had rebuked the demon and taught as one having authority, so that everyone was astonished. And they go to Andrew and Simon's home, Simon, whose name will later be changed to Peter. We find out in this passage is married, something we learn for the first time. And we hear that his mother-in-law is sick in bed with a fever. So the disciples tell Jesus this, and he goes to her at once. And we're told what he does with her. He takes her by the hand and he lifts her up, and the fever leaves her, and she serves them. Jesus responds immediately. He goes to Simon's mother-in-law. He touches her by the hand and lifts her up. Those are important words that we will hear as we continue the story through Mark, touching people, lifting them up, and going to them. Jesus, you see, doesn't hesitate to touch her or to lift her up or to heal her. This is the sum of Jesus's ministry, to go to people, to touch them, maybe with his hands, maybe with his words, maybe with just his presence. And through all of that, he lifts them up and heals them. Later in the passage, Jesus tells his disciples we need to go to other neighboring towns and to proclaim the message. In other words, Jesus and his followers need to keep moving, to go out into all the neighborhoods, to all the places where people need to be touched, to be lifted up, to be healed, and to hear the gospel of God's redeeming love. Jesus, you see, met people where they were. He didn't wait for them to come to him. That's important for us to remember as followers of Jesus, to meet people where they are, rather than expecting them to come to us. In these times of COVID where we can't gather together, how can we go to where people are? How can we tell them about what it is that is happening as we embrace and proclaim the good news of God's love for all people? How do we touch people? How do we help lift them up? How do we help provide the healing word of love to people so deeply in need? We haven't been able to do that physically, and we certainly haven't been able to touch people. One of the greatest losses, I believe, of this time of COVID, that human touch, that opportunity to just put your hand on someone's shoulder or give someone a huge hug, or to be able to kiss your family members who maybe you're not able to even visit. These limitations have profoundly affected us, causing us to feel even more isolation, anxiety, and in some cases, deep, deep depression. When we think about those feelings and we couple them with feelings of grief, loss, and fear, some of us may find that it's difficult just to even keep it together. We're hanging on by a thread, barely able to take one step at a time, searching for light and hope, and trusting that one day we will be able to be together again. To tell you the truth, a year ago, as we were starting to hear news about this virus where we couldn't touch one another, we couldn't pass the common cup, we had to put our offerings in a plate, we couldn't pass the offering plate, we had sanitizer and handy wipes around. I don't think any of us thought that a year later we would still be even more isolated, even more masked and withdrawn from the ability to gather together. But we've never lived through a pandemic like this before. And so we do what we know is the right thing to do, in spite of the pain and the suffering and the difficulties of this time. It feels like for a year we've been in the season of Lent. We've had to give up so much. And so we're going to talk about a new way as we anticipate Lent in 10 days. We're going to talk about a new way to observe the season of Lent. And the reason or the way that we're going to talk about it is because we want to focus on what happens with Simon's mother-in-law. As soon as she's cured, as soon as she's healed of the fever, she gets up. And the gospel says that she served them. She got up and she served them. The word serve in Greek is diakonia. She was the first person in Mark's gospel to serve Jesus and to serve the young men that Jesus had called. She served the men, but her service, to quote a recent commentary, her service was a way of showing respect and gratitude to Jesus, her healer. Maybe she was also serving God as a means of serving Jesus. And we know that Jesus always commends humble service and describes himself as one who came to serve, diakonia. What a faithful response Simon's mother-in-law had to serve Jesus and his followers. Now, we have a deacon with us. The word deacon comes from this word service. Sally is ordained a deacon in God's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and her ministry as a deacon, as a permanent deacon, a vocational deacon, is to serve and to bridge the needs of the community with the service of the community, the service of the congregation and of the church. And Sally, during her time with us, will help us and those at St. Peter's find ways to serve those who are in need in our neighborhoods, in our communities. She will plant seeds among us for ways that we can enhance our outreach ministries and our ministries of service. And isn't it what we always strive to be, to serve our neighbors and love our neighbors as ourselves? And so in a few days, in 10 days, we will begin our 40-day journey of Lent. As I've already said, I feel like we've already given up so much during this time of COVID that my hope is that we'll take on service. Now, it'll have to be a little different because we can't go to people and be with them, but there are lots of ways that we can be providing service to people. Maybe you want to write down a few things that you think you might want to add to your list of service. I've asked the staff to think of ways that, and just small things that we can do to be of service. And hopefully in a few days, we'll have a calendar of 40 days that we can send you of ways we can be of service. Ticking off kind of like an Advent calendar, days closer and closer to Holy Week and Easter. But these are just a few of my thoughts. Without being asked, and I think that's key, without being asked, clean our rooms, do our laundry. Now, for those of us who are living alone, it's like, well, no one's here to do it for me anyway, so it's either me doing it or nobody doing it. But there might be other people in the household that could hear these words and think, I could do that. I could make my bed in the morning. I could clean the bathroom when no one asked me to do it. I could send a note to someone and just tell them I'm thinking of them. For those of us who live alone, that is a beautiful thing to receive in the mail or to receive an email, just a note or a phone call that says, I'm thinking of you. How are you doing? Again, for those of us who are living alone, it can be a very isolated and difficult time. hearing from people near and far is an easy way to be of service, to just check in on people. Maybe you want to send flowers or buy a flower arrangement at the grocery store. Maybe you want to run the vacuum cleaner. Or even if you don't, maybe that's one way you can be of service. Or write a love note to your husband, or your wife, or your spouse, or your grandparents, or your nieces and nephews. And another thought is, since we're going to be focusing on Germantown Help and how we can help with the food disparity in our community, maybe you want to collect 40 items of non-perishable food during Lent, or a perishable item for each week. There are lots of ways that we can turn this time of Lent into time of service and of giving and of sharing. One thing I know for sure is that when we do something for someone else, when we serve others, we are following in the footsteps of Jesus, and we're walking in the way of love. Amen.